Hi there, thanks for joining me today. My name is Jo and I'm an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator from the UK. Today I want to share with you this card that I made fairly recently for a blog hop. Now when I started it, it was very much an experiment because I had a vision of these beautiful bright sunflowers against a really dark background. So it was a little bit of a play. I liked the result, and the more I worked on it, the more I thought it would make such a really pretty card. It is beautiful, I do love it, but I have a vision of a green background here. So on my demonstration I'm actually going to use Granny Apple Green, which is a very vibrant green, so I'm hoping that that vibrancy will actually show through as well. But the technique I'm going to use is exactly the same, so and I'm using exactly the same colours for the sunflower. It is just this background that's going to change. Okay, so the paper I'm using is our Fluid 100 paper from Stampin' Up. This is a really lovely soft watercolour paper and the water flows really beautifully over the top of it. So that's what I'm using. I have cut a piece a different size today. I'm going to actually make a square card. So this is 12 centimetres square. I'm making this for a birthday, so I want to do a square card. So hopefully this experiment will work today. If not, we're back to the drawing board. So the stamps that we're going to use are the Celebrate Sunflowers. These were beautiful stamps that have some really lovely coordinating dies that go with them. Absolutely gorgeous. So really, really lovely set, and hopefully you'll see some of the beauty in it today. So I have my large sunflower stamp here. And first of all, I want to do is to ink it in a Versamark ink pad. So this is just our watercolour, watermark stamp pad. And these are really great for creating watermarks on dark card. But also they are really good for embossing because they actually, it has glycerine within it. So it holds all the powders when you're actually heat embossing. So it works really, really well. So that's inked in Versamark, but before I actually use it, I'm going to go over the top of it in soft suede ink, okay? So this is, if I inked that now and clear embossed it, then it would literally just give a clear outline, but I actually want a darker outline, so I'm using soft suede and it's going straight over the top of my Versamark ink. And then I'm just going to stamp it off onto one corner here. Okay, so as you see, you get the dark background, but if I now pop this onto a piece of scrap paper and this is clear embossing powder, and pop this over the top. You'll see, if I now heat that, what will happen, it will actually go like a brownie colour. So as you can see, this is now heat set. I'm just going to give it a quick brush over just to remove any sort of little bits that are hanging around. You can feel it's sort of a little bit gritty. So that's all done, that's all heat embossed, so that's going to act like a barrier for when we're actually painting, so our water effectively will not go beyond these lines. Now I want to do a second one over in this corner here, but what is really important when you're doing this technique is to ensure that you clean your stamp in between each image, because otherwise you will contaminate your Versamark ink pad, so that is really important. You'll see mine is used in classes quite a lot, so it's already very well contaminated, but it doesn't stop it from working for this technique. So, you know, they do last well. So that's my Versamark. I'm using my soft suede directly on top. And then I'm just going to stamp this off to the side. I think I'm just going to have a bit less this time. Okay, so I will clean that off in a second. Just now need to emboss my second sunflower. I will heat emboss this now. Okay, so you just want to double check that it's actually all set. It's harder to see on watercolor paper than it is actually on something like Whisper White, but you can see because it does disappear a little bit into the actual paper itself, so don't worry too much. Okay, so I'll just get rid of any excess there so that I know that it's all clean. So I'm going to paint my sunflowers first, and then we'll move on to our actual middle piece here. So I'm going to be using two brushes. These are from our new water painters. These are brilliant because we've got a thinnish brush, and then we have a slightly bigger brush, which I'm going to use for my wash. And then if you want to do a really big background wash, we've got this lovely sort of chisel shaped brush, which is really good for obtaining sort of stripes and things like that. So they're really good. So I'm going to start off first of all with the sunflowers, as I say, and I'm going to be using three colours. I'm going to be using Bumblebee, which is again one of our new in colours, Pumpkin Pie, and Cinnamon Cider, which is also one of our new in colours. So because I'm going to be using these for quite some time, what I like to do is to create myself like a palette as opposed to actually use the colour from my ink pads. So I generally have a selection of blocks that hang around, and all I do is I just put some ink onto my blocks, and then by doing that I can put my ink pads to one side until I need to refill them. Okay, just pick up sort of a nice covering really. There we go. Okay, what's nice about this as well, I can sit them here and I can actually see really easily which colours are which. So what I want to do is start with my fine brush, and I also want a piece of tissue to hand because I don't want my brush to be too wet at any given time. So although this is watercolouring, I need to control that level of water that's actually getting down onto the paper. So I'm going to start off with Bumblebee, and it's always best to start light. So I move some of the colour out and just make sure it's really quite light. If you can, always have a piece of scrap of either a piece of white or a piece of the actual watercolour paper itself to hand, because if you have that, then you can actually test sort of how deep the colours are and things like that before you actually go in on your project. So actually this is a piece of the watercolour paper here, so I can see that that's going to wash out quite lightly. So I quite like that because that's where I want to start. Okay, so I'm going to choose one of my petals, and I'm going to start off with the Bumblebee. Now I don't want this to be too dark at this stage, so I'm just going to control that water in my brush. I'm going to pick up a bit more colour now so I can add a little bit darker towards that centre. And at the top here I want it to be almost white, not quite white, but just have a really light wash on it. Okay, and then straight away I'm going to go in with some Pumpkin Pie. Now I only need a really small amount just to start with. Just going to make sure my brush isn't too wet, and then start pulling it into my leaf, or petal I should say. Okay, so I'm just dragging that colour up, and then you can see that what will happen is the yellow and the orange will actually start to blend together quite naturally. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm going to pick up a little bit of the cinnamon cider, what is named then, and also add a little bit of that to the bottom. Now I can feel this is moving, it's really quite wet, so what I'm going to do is leave that petal for a moment. I'm going to come back and add some more colour in a second. So again, I'm just picking up my yellow, and I'm going to pull in. Notice I'm not going to that petal next door. I want to move it away because I want to try and make sure that the two don't bleed together. They shouldn't, because we've got a kind of barrier between them, but just to make sure that it doesn't. Okay, I'm going to pick up a little bit of orange and start pulling that through. and a little bit more yellow. I felt I didn't have quite enough yellow there. You can obviously do this in whatever colours you want to, and however dark or light you want to do them. That's entirely up to you. It's personal preference, and there's so many different varieties of sunflowers out there, so you can really sort of go to town a little bit. And again, I'm just, can you see I'm almost tapping that in? I can see there's a little puddle of water, so I'm just sort of dabbing it in really, because then what will happen is when it dries, it will automatically flow into each other. So do the same again here. Yellow, I can see that's getting a bit dark, so I just blot off my brush and pull through the light colour. And then I'm going to go through with some more pumpkin pie. And then finally a little bit of cinnamon cider. It just gives that depth to it. It just gives it that sort of richness really. Okay, so I'm going to leave those to dry. I'm going to come back over here now because this one will be dry. Just going to start again with the yellow. Again, just pull it through. When you feel that it's sort of getting too dark, too high up your petal, you can just stop and wipe your brush off. This is actually quite a quick technique. It's not as involved as I've done some other painting with on vellum and things like that, which obviously does take a long while. Whereas this is quite a quick technique. It is more about sort of throwing the colour on really. So it's you want it to be a little bit mottled because it's obviously a flower. Okay, so I'll just do a couple more leaves and then I will actually stop the video and I will go away and just to finish the flower because I want you to see how the whole thing sort of goes together. So I'll just recap on a couple of the petals here. And don't be afraid to sort of, if you're thinking, well, I've just put that colour on and it's sort of washed out my other colour, you can just add some more. If you're finding that you're struggling to add more because it's sort of it's blotting a little bit, or you're getting little puddle marks or whatever, just let it dry because it's all about layers. So once it's dry, you can go back and you can add some more colour to it. So again, just that's a little bit dark, so I'm just going to pull some of that colour back. Watercolouring is actually really forgiving, so you know, it's not as bad as if you're doing it on something like Whisper White. It's harder to actually move the colour around, but on something like this, it's, you know, it's reasonably forgiving. So don't be afraid to just really get involved and play around a little bit. Okay, so that's how I did the sunflower. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch camera off and finish this part. I'll do this one as well, but I will come back and show you how I did the centres, and then we can actually move on to do our wash in the middle. Okay, I'll see you in a while. Okay, so welcome back, and as you can see, now I've done all my petals, so these are all completed. I just need to do the centres of my sunflowers before we actually do our colour wash in the middle. So to do the centres, I used simply cinnamon cider, so I'm going to put the other two out of the way for the time being. So this is the lovely colour here, so it's reasonably dark, but it's got a sort of nice goldeny sort of tone to it. It works really well for the centres. So I'm actually going to go over to my slightly larger brush this time, and only because that's a bigger area to cover, so it's easier doing with a larger brush. So what I want to do is just mix up some of the cinnamon cider so it's nicely flowing. Again, I don't want it too wet, but I do need a bit more of a flow on my nib this time. So I'm going to start towards the edge of the actual centre, and I'm just going to sort of wiggle my brush around a little bit because this is the area I want to be a little bit darker. Okay, so once I've done that, I've only done half, as you can see, but I don't want it to dry too much, so I'm going to work backwards and then start blending in the colours. You'll see there's a bit of a line there at the moment. That's because obviously that was dark what went on, but we're going to blend that through in a second. So I just now want to do the same again. So darker on those outside edges. And then start blending it into the centre. Darker on those outside edges. And it's good to just to try and keep it moving, because the more you keep it moving, the easier your colours will blend. It's a bit light here, so I'm just going in with a little bit darker again. And again here, just to blend them nicely through. You do sometimes get little areas like this, which is where obviously embossing powder has set at this point, but I think it all adds to it, so I wouldn't worry too much about that if you get that sort of thing happening. Okay, so I'm happy that's had one wash colour, but what I want to do is I want to make the centre darker and also possibly some of these edges a little bit darker. So I'm going to start in the middle, and I'm just adding darker colour in there. Okay, and then what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to dab it on. So by dabbing it, it finds its own place to settle rather than me actually moving it around. So this instantly darkens it. And then once it's dry, it will lighten slightly, but it will remain that nicely rich dark colour. Okay, so I've done that. Now I'm just going to go back just to some of these edges, even going into the bottoms of some of my petals, just to build up that intense darker sort of centre. Because if you think of a sunflower, you think of the sunflower's centres are actually black, but they're not actually black. They're a really, really dark sort of grey, browny sort of colour, depending on what variety you have, of course. But just by building it up and leaving that sort of centre ring, it just kind of makes it look quite dramatic. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a moment. I might come back and touch it up again depending on sort of how I feel, but it's best to let them dry, because once they're dry you'll see the true colours of them. So I'm going to move on to this one. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. Just start around those dark edges just onto the bottom of the petals, and then start just almost wiggle your brush and it will just start moving it around. I am going to leave this for a moment because I think if I let it dry, then you get an overall effect, and we can move on to do our middle piece here now. So I'll pop that to one side, and I'm going to use this time Granny Apple Green. So as I said, this is a bit of an experiment, this, so we will see what happens. It may work, it may not, so we'll just see what happens. So this is Granny Apple Green. As I say, it's quite a vibrant sort of green, really. And I am going to want a reasonable amount of this because this is going all in that centre. So I'm just going to make sure I get a nice covering of it onto my block. And I'm actually going to take a clean block next to it so that I can sort of mix some of the colour up a little bit, so it's not too stark to start with. So I'm just making sure that my brush is completely clean of any of the cinnamon cider I was using here. And I'm first going to test this little bit of colour and my brush direct just onto this bottom piece here. Just, I notice I've got a couple of little gaps where there's not petals, and it's a good little experiment place. Okay, yeah, I think that's going to work. So what I'm going to do is pick up some of this off of my block here, and I'm just going to mix it on the clean block. This is just so I can get a bit of a watered down version of what I'm looking for. I'm going to take my test piece and just see how it's flowing, what sort of colour it looks like. It looks okay for a start. We're going to start around the edges, and then we'll move into the middle where we might go a little bit lighter. So just to make sure I get a nice edge on this, I'm just going to first of all lay some colour in between my petals, just really carefully, because once that's in there then we can start sort of moving our colour around a little bit. Let's say this is just to get our first layer down, because we just want to make sure that it kind of hits that barrier and it's not going to go and bleed into our flowers. We will add some depth around here in a while, but this is just to get our first layer down. Okay, you see if I already start moving that around, you start to get sort of a different effect on it. Okay, so that's kind of my first area done. What I want to do is just to take some more colour and make sure it's nice and moving again nicely. Just make sure that your brush is wet enough but not too wet. If you're finding it's getting a little bit dry, which you can do when you keep sort of wiping it, you can then just give it a little squeeze, which will release some more water, but just make sure that you've not obviously pushed too much out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving this colour around. So where this is dried, you will get a bit of a line to start with, but we're going to work on it. That will disappear eventually, so don't worry too much at this stage. Now my brush is a little bit dry there, I can feel it's dry, so I'm just going to give it a little gentle squeeze as I'm pushing the ink around. Now the only thing you don't want to do at this stage is to water your paper down too much, because you'll find that the colours will sort of disperse a bit too quickly. So we're just moving it at this stage, getting a general layer of ink down, and then we can build on it. Again, I'm just going to mix up a little bit more here. So I've put quite a bit of water in that there. Okay, because at some point I need to start getting slightly lighter in my colouring. So as I say, I'm just moving this. It also does have to get worse before it gets better, this, so just stick with it, don't give up on it. Can you see I'm going lighter here? So what I'm doing is I'm trying to gently squeeze as I move my colour, and this is just pulling out that nice gentle effect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the other side as well, just to start pulling it through. And then we should have quite a nice sort of layer in the middle. Okay, and I can feel that is quite wet, so I am just going to let that dry a little bit. I'm going to turn it round and I'm going to start working on this area here, just to pull in the initial colour. So I think it agree we've got our first layer laid down, so we can start to see where those colours are going to be. Okay, I'm just going to let that dry just for a moment because we're looking for this mottled effect. So if I keep building up on it, we're not kind of going to get that effect. So I'm going to leave it just to dry a few seconds, and I'm going to refresh my block with Granny Apple Green. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, I'm trying to think which one I started with now. I think it was this one, wasn't it? So I'm just going to start again, picking up some colour. And I'm going to start in between my petals, and I'm going to just draw that colour out. So I'm using almost like a flicking technique just to draw the colour out towards the centre. And I'm looking for it to be quite intense in between my petals, and then we're gradually going to get lighter as we come out. Again, just going to and towards the edges I'm just trying to blend it out a little bit so that it's quite intense in here in between, but as it comes out it does blend quite nicely with our mottled sort of area that we've got towards the front. And don't be afraid just to add some layers to it, and if you find it's getting too dark you can always block them off slightly. So don't, you know, don't think that's the end result. You can just keep building on it. Granny Apple Green is one of my favourite colours. It's so vibrant, yeah, it's very cheerful, and I just love it. When you actually watercolour with something like green, you can actually start to see sort of like the blue tones that start to sort of come out of it. Now you can have this as mottled or you know, as you want it really. I want this to be quite sort of quite mottly, so that you can really see the greens go from sort of dark to light. So I'm not going to add too much more other than to these center points, just to darken it down and sort of brighten it up really. But what I am going to do is I'm going to let this dry in a second, just so that again we can see its true colour, because once it's dry it will lighten somewhat, so you don't want to work it too much. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that for now. I'm just going to add darker down here so that this sort of blends in with it. And then I'm going to move back onto this one. So I'm going to squeeze some more water into my brush just to make sure that it's really moving nicely again. Okay, so I'm quite happy with the way that's moved around. I think all I'm going to do is, again, allow that to dry. I'm just going to go right into the points just to give it that real depth. But I'm going to go back to my smaller brush for that. And I'm just going to, again, refresh my block. Just pick up some more colour. Again, I'm just going to pick it up. And I really want to just try and get into those areas, just to intensify that darkness. Okay, so I'm quite happy with the result there. The only part I'm not happy about is this piece here. It's not blended quite as well as this part here. So what I'm going to do is just make sure my brush is clean and it's nice and wet, and I'm just going to run over it with a clean brush. Now what you can also do is actually blot. So by blotting you get more of a mottled effect. So if you really like that mottled effect, that's how you can achieve that. I like it. I think it looks nice. Again, I'm squeezing that as I go and then just blotting some of the colour off. Okay, now that is quite wet, so what I'm going to quickly do is give it a quick blast with my my heat gun just to dry it off properly. Okay, so that's now painted. I'm quite happy with that. So now what I need to do is to obviously make it into a card. So I will now just have a quick look at what I'm going to do, and then I will show you how I make it into a card. See you in a moment. Okay, so I've finally decided what I'm going to do to actually put this card together. I think with these vibrant middles, they need something quite contrasting behind them. So I tried various colours and played around a little bit, but I quite liked the look of the black. It's quite stark, but I actually sort of think it really makes it pop nicely. So what I've done is, this is obviously 12 centimetres square we started with. I've cut a bumblebee layer at 12.5 centimetres and a granny apple green at 13 centimetres, and I'm just going to matte layer those onto my card front. I didn't want to add too much more because I think it's quite busy anyway, so I think we need to sort of keep it a little bit under control in regards to what we put on it. So I've decided to go with two part greetings. This one is really useful. I use this an awful lot for family and things like that. I'm using the daughter, so this is for my stepdaughter, and I wanted to use that, but I wanted something a bit bigger than the happy birthday that's in this particular set. So then I started looking around and I came across this one. Now this set is brand new, that's coming in our autumn winter catalogue, so this is from the 4th of August. And I love this little saying up here that says, wishing you every kind of wonderful. I think that's really nice. It's not birthday, but I just think it's a really lovely sentiment. So I'm using that and the daughter. So what I've done is I have actually stamped them onto a piece of basic black cardstock, and I've heat embossed them in white, so it just kind of brings everything together, makes everything really sort of lush and really sort of vibrant. So the first thing I'm going to do is to actually layer these pieces up. So this is first of all going onto my bumblebee layer. Okay, I'm then going to glue that onto my granny apple green layer. Just making sure everything's lined up nicely. Okay, so now that's all stuck down, what I actually want to do is I'm going to use 3D foam, our dimensional glue pieces, just to raise that up, because I want this part to be quite flat, because I think there's enough going on with that part. So I'm just going to stick some dimensionals onto the reverse. Okay, so what I want is this big area at the top right. So I'm just making sure I've got my card the right way. I've done that a few times. I'm going to have to lift this up slightly so I can see where I'm lining it up. Okay, so that's now on there, and then, as I say, I'm going to stick these underneath each other, so they're different sizes, but I'm going to stick them actually butted up to each other because I think they'll look quite nice as a sort of gather together there. So I'm just using normal glue for this. And again, I'm just going to hold it up just so I can make sure I'm lined up where I want it. And I'm going to stick this one underneath. So I've butted it right up to it, so it's right next to it, so it all looks like one piece really. Okay, and then finally I'm just going to add 2 or 3 little gems to finish it off, and these are some new gems that we've got coming called Wonderful Gems. They're in the Autumn Winter catalogue, and if you can see closely, they have like little pieces of glitter in, and they're quite what's quite nice about them is they're not all the same. So if you want a little bit less, you can obviously have one with a little bit less glitter, or you can use a little bit more if you wish to. So I'm going to use a bit of both. So I'm going to have this one here because I like the look of that, and I want a little one one that's quite nice. I'm just going to stick that there. Whoops, it's come off its little back piece. There we go. And then finally one more, I'm going to go for this one here, I think. And that one's going to pop up there. There we go. So that is the card actually complete. I'm hoping she's going to like it. I am going to have to obviously just put an innard into it, which probably will have a little bit of decoration just to finish off. So these are the two. So you can see the difference is quite obvious. I like them both actually. I can't decide which one is my favourite. Yeah, I do like them both. So you choose. Which one do you prefer? Okay, so I hope that's helped you today. And if you've got any questions, then please just give me a shout. Thanks for watching. Bye.